So for the next few weeks, we are going to be talking about our Old Testament stories that come from this book, the Bible. This book that we have, that we've read in lots of different ways. But this book is not just a book that we read usually from cover to cover, though we do sometimes. And instead, it's a collection of books that are all together. And the story that we read today, Noah, comes from that very first book, the book of Genesis, and early on in that book. Now, in this collection of books, we have lots of different kinds of stories. We have stories that we understand as history, sort of the telling of our people and our story of faith. We have words that are poetry. We have words that are intentionally fiction contained within it. And so we have all of these things. And the story that we just heard Sally read today, some folks would consider as part of our history. And other folks would consider it more of a myth, a story that has been made up to explain something that might have happened that we can't really explain. So our best guess is that at some point in time when folks were telling stories, there was a really big flood. And if you recall, your world was pretty small when you didn't have cars and planes and big, huge boats. Well, they did have a big, huge boat, apparently. But when you didn't travel very far, much further than your feet could take you, if there was a big flood, it would seem to you that the entire world had flooded. And so we have this story that some say is history and some say is myth. But regardless of what kind of story we say that it is, we can look at it and say, what does this story tell us about who our God is and how our God works in this world? So we have this story, and this story starts with God talking with Noah. Noah and his wife. Noah's wife. She doesn't have a name. Noah's wife. Mrs. Noah. I don't know. Joan of Arc? No, that's not right. Anyway, in the story, God communicates with Noah a sense of sadness, a sense of despair about what is going on in the world, that things have gone horribly. The people are acting badly. They are not caring about God. They are making bad decision after bad decision. And so as the story goes, Noah is asked by God to build a big, huge ark. And really it's out of God's grief and God's frustration that this happens. And so what do we make of that? What that tells us is that God is not distant from us. That God experiences what we experience, not in the same way that we humans do, but that God grieves with us when our earth is a mess. And God mourns with us when tragic things happen. That, my friends, is good news that this story tells us. And now the story also tells us that two of every kind, I've got some camels here, and I've got some kangaroos, and some elephants, two of every kind go on the ark, right? That's how we know the story. But did you hear what Sally said? How many did Sally say went on? 7. 2? 7? We don't really know. The best scholars can say is that there was 2 different stories and they got mashed together, or the scribe who was writing it fell asleep and he woke back up and was like, 2, 7? I don't remember. I'll just put down a number and we'll keep on going. We don't really know. But what we do know is that the story has it that all the animals in the earth, I would have taken without the mosquitoes and the ticks and the other biting sorts of things, but God is better than I am, because God made sure that all of them, as the story goes, got on the ark. And what does that tell us? That tells us that God cares for all creation. All of it. That is good news. So we've got all these animals living on the big ark, peacefully. I don't know. But it rains. And it rains for a really, really long time. But then we get to the best part of the story. The rain goes away, and the rainbow appears. And we understand that rainbow to be God's promise. And that promise is twofold. The first part is that God promises to never again destroy the entire earth. God makes a fresh start. God makes a promise to do differently with the world. That is a beautiful thing, that God allows for this fresh start, and that God promises to help us do that, not in complete destroying ways, but in little ways, to allow for little fresh starts. And that is good news. And then the other piece to the rainbow promise is that God promises to be with us always. Always. God promises to guide us when we're open to it. God promises to walk with us, especially perhaps when we are making bad choices as humanity. God promises to be with us and to help us and to guide us toward that fresh start. So every time we might forget this, we can catch a glimpse of a rainbow and remember. We don't have to have a string tied around our finger or put our watch on the other hand, because we see a rainbow. Sometimes in the sky, sometimes in a child's drawing, sometimes in that rainbow flag waving outside of our church. We see the rainbow that reminds us that God is with us and that God loves us all. And that is good news. And so this story that we have, that sometimes we don't quite know what to do with, right? This story tells us some amazing things about who God is and how God works. It tells us that God grieves with us and is frustrated when we humans make really bad choices. That is good news. The story tells us that God cares for all of creation, and that is good news. The story tells us that God promises to never destroy the entire earth again, and that is good news. And that God is with us always. Friends, that is good news. This story is full of good news for children and adults alike. We can hold on to the good news of Noah and the ark and the rainbow promise and the covenant that God made with Noah and with us. Thanks be to God. Amen.